My grandfather handed each of us a small wooden box at his 80th birthday dinner. My father called it folk art from a confused old man. My brother made a joke I will not repeat here. My mother smiled the way she always does when she feels embarrassed by someone she loves. Tight, practiced, aimed somewhere above your head rather than at you. I was the only one who actually opened mine that night. 2 days later, my grandfather's accountant called my cell phone just after 7 in the morning. He said 5 words I have not forgotten since. "Lena, you need to come in." My name is Lena. I am 29 years old. I work as a registered nurse at a hospital in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I work long shifts. I eat lunch standing at a nursing station most days. And I split a mortgage with my boyfriend Marco on a small house with a leaky garage door we had been meaning to fix for 2 years. I do not tell you that to paint myself as a martyr. I tell you that because it matters to understand where I started when everything changed. My grandfather, Rupert, was a 79-year-old widower who lived on the east side of Denton, in a ranch house he had owned since 1987. He kept a vegetable garden behind the house that he tended with more consistency and dedication than most people give to their careers. He drove a 2011 Ford F-150 with a dent in the passenger door that he refused to have fixed because, as he put it, "It still starts every morning, and that's more than I can say for half the people I know." He wore the same brown canvas jacket from October through April, and he called me every Sunday evening at 6 o'clock sharp just to talk. He was not a flashy man, he was not loud. He did not drop names or talk about money, or try to impress anyone at dinner. My father's side of the family treated him with the polite, barely concealed impatience that some families reserve for old relatives they feel obligated to include, but privately wish would require less maintenance. My father, Vernon, had opinions about everything and expressed them loudly. He had worked in commercial insurance for 30 years and made decent money, and that decent money had funded my brother's considerably less decent decisions for the better part of the last decade. My brother Chester was 34 years old and ran a custom home building company that he described as scaling aggressively at every single family gathering. He wore expensive boots, leased a truck that cost more per month than my car payment and insurance combined, and spoke in a specific kind of language I had come to associate with men who have more confidence than capital. Words like liquidity events and vertical integration and pipelines. Chester had never built a home from the ground up in his life. He hired subcontractors, sourced the work, and called himself a developer. My mother, Greta, was the kind of woman who measured the success of a family gathering by how seamlessly she could redirect conversation away from anything uncomfortable. She loved Chester in the simple, uncomplicated way some parents love the child who reflects back the version of themselves they most admire. She loved me too, I think, but her love for me came with an asterisk she never quite acknowledged. I was the one who had gone the practical route, which was her way of saying I had not fulfilled whatever vision she had carried of my future. Nursing was fine. Nursing was noble. Nursing was also, in her estimation, not particularly aspirational. My grandfather's 80th birthday fell on a Saturday in early October. We drove up to Denton in Marco's car because mine had been making a grinding noise I was saving up to have looked at. The weather was that particular Texas fall that doesn't fully commit, still warm, the light going golden and soft in the late afternoon. My grandfather had made chili, which he made exactly one way. No beans, no shortcuts on the stove for 4 hours. He set the table himself, with mismatched cloth napkins he had pressed flat and folded into neat triangles, and he had put a small vase of marigolds from his garden in the center. It was the kind of effort that was quiet and deliberate, and that my father managed to walk past without acknowledging. After dinner, my grandfather excused himself and came back from the back bedroom carrying 4 small wooden boxes stacked in his arms. He had made them himself. I could see the tool marks on the hinges, the grain of the pine, the way each one was slightly different from the others because they were handmade and not manufactured. He set one in front of each of us. Inside each box, visible when you lifted the lid, was a USB flash drive and a small square of folded paper. My brother picked his up and turned it over between his fingers. "What is this, Gramps? Your vacation photos?" He laughed at his own joke. My father chuckled. My mother said, "Oh, how thoughtful," which meant she had already decided it was not. My grandfather sat back down at the head of the table. "The rest is on the drive," he said simply. "Read the note first." Chester set the box down on the table without opening the note and reached across to pour himself more sweet tea. My father glanced at the folded paper, then at my grandfather, then back at the paper. He did not open it. He patted my grandfather's hand and said, "Dad, you really don't need to give us anything. Just having you here is the gift." It was the right thing to say, and it meant nothing, and we all knew it and moved on. My mother put her box into her purse without opening it at all. I opened mine. The note was written in my grandfather's handwriting, which had gotten a little slower over the years but was still entirely legible. It said, "For Lena, handle with care. The password is the day you were born. Don't let anyone talk you out of what's on here." I looked up at him. He was watching me with the expression I had seen on his face before when something mattered to him: level, steady, a little careful. I folded the note back up and put it in my jacket pocket. I held the box in my lap for the rest of the evening. When we left, Chester's box was still on the table near the salt shaker. I saw it sitting there as I said goodbye to my grandfather. My grandfather walked me to the door, same as always, and when I hugged him, he held on a moment, longer than usual. I did not know that was the last time I would see him standing. He passed away in his sleep 2 nights later. His neighbor found him in the morning after noticing the garden hose had been left running. The hospital called my father first. My father called me. It was 5:43 in the morning and I was already awake, getting ready for a shift, and I sat down on the bathroom floor in my scrubs and cried for a while before I could get up and drive to work. The USB drive sat on my bedside table for 1 day. I kept thinking about the note. Don't let anyone talk you out of what's on here. On the second evening after he passed, I plugged it into my laptop. It prompted me for a password. I typed in my birth, day, year, no spaces. It opened. There were several folders, a letter titled, "Read this first," financial documents, an LLC operating agreement, property records. I opened the letter and read 3 paragraphs before I had to stop and read them again from the beginning because I was not absorbing what I was reading. I called Mr. Decker the next morning. I had met him once 2 Christmases ago, when I had stopped by my grandfather's house and he happened to be there dropping off paperwork. He was a quiet, precise man in his 60s, the kind of accountant who does not waste sentences. When I said my name, he said, "I was wondering when you'd call. Bring the drive, come at 9. His office was in a low brick building off the main road, very plain, the kind of place that announces nothing about the money that moves through it. He made coffee without asking whether I wanted any and set it in front of me and told me to pull up the drive on his desktop. Rupert Holdings LLC was a commercial real estate company my grandfather had registered in Texas in 1993. Over 30 years quietly, without ever mentioning it to anyone in the family, he had acquired 7 commercial properties across the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Retail strip space, a small industrial warehouse, 2 medical office suites. He managed them through a third-party property management company that sent statements to a P.O. box and deposited rent directly into a business account that bore no name any of us would have recognized. The combined appraised value of the portfolio was $9.2 million. I sat in that chair for a long moment. Mr. Decker did not try to fill the silence. He let me sit with it, which I appreciated more than I could have said. "He never spent it," I finally said. "He reinvested it," Mr. Decker said. "For 30 years he was exceptionally patient." He walked me through the operating agreement. My grandfather had updated it 4 months before his birthday. The sole member and manager of Rupert Holdings LLC was now me, contingent on activation of the USB credential within 72 hours of his passing. The credential was time-locked through a legal technology firm that specialized in exactly this kind of estate planning. The other 3 drives had also contained credentials, each one giving access to a designated portion of the portfolio, but those credentials had expired automatically when the window closed. Any unclaimed portions had already transferred, per the operating agreement, into a conservation trust my grandfather had established years ago, a wildlife refuge in East Texas that he had donated to every Christmas for as long as I could remember. "His attorney will formalize everything at the readings," Mr. Decker said. He slid a card across the desk. "His name is Mr. Sutton. He'll be in touch within the week." I drove home in a state that was not quite shock and not quite grief and not quite anything I had a word for. Marco was home when I got there. He took one look at me, poured 2 glasses of water, and sat down across from me at the kitchen table and just waited. I told him everything. He was quiet for a moment, then he said, "Your grandfather knew exactly what he was doing." I know. That's what scares me. The will reading was 5 days after my grandfather passed. Mr. Sutton's office was in downtown Denton, a narrow suite on the 3rd floor with good light and plain furniture and no art on the walls. My parents and my brother were already seated when I arrived. My brother had his phone face up on the table. My mother was wearing the blazer she reserved for occasions she deemed important. My father had the particular stillness of a man who has decided he is about to be in charge of something. Mr. Sutton read the document without preamble. He explained in plain language that my grandfather had transferred the entirety of Rupert Holdings LLC to me through the credentialing system, that the other 3 credentials had expired unactivated, and that per the operating agreement, the remaining portions had reverted to the Conservation Trust, the cash accounts and personal property of my grandfather's estate. The house, the truck, the contents, were modest and would be distributed equally among the 4 of us. The business assets were mine alone. My father says, "What business assets?" My brother said, "Rupert Holdings," like he was hearing the name for the first time in his life, which he was. Mr. Sutton explained. He was patient and thorough. By the time he finished, my brother had put his phone face down. "You're telling me he had $9 million, my father said. His voice was flat in a way I associated with him trying to control something. "The portfolio appraised at 9.2, Mr. Sutton said. "And he drove that old truck," my mother said, mostly to herself. Chester pushed back from the table. "The drive, I left the drive." He said it slowly, like he was working through an equation. It was still on his table. I didn't even open the note. He stopped. He looked at the wall. He looked at my father. I thought it was just. I didn't think it was. My father turned immediately to Mr. Sutton. "There has to be another way to access those credentials. The estate has the legal authority to reissue." "There is no reissuance mechanism," Mr. Sutton said. "The architecture was intentional. Your father worked with a specialized firm for over a year to design this. Any credential not activated within 72 hours of his passing was permanently voided. The Conservation Trust transfer is already complete and irrevocable." "Then we can test it," my father said. He was 80 years old. He clearly lacked the capacity to make decisions of this magnitude. Mr. Sutton opened the folder in front of him and removed 3 stapled documents. He set them on the table and slid them toward my father without a word. My grandfather had completed independent cognitive evaluations in August, September, and early October. 3 separate neuropsychologists, none affiliated with one another. All 3 assessments rated his cognitive function as exceptional for his age. He had scored in the 92nd percentile on executive function testing. He had anticipated this conversation specifically. My father picked up the papers. He read the first page. He set them down. Chester stood up. He braced his hands on the table and looked at me in a way that made the room feel smaller. "Lena, come on. You know this isn't right. You can't honestly sit there and tell me you're going to let this stand." "I didn't do anything to you," I said. "You left the box on his table." "I didn't know what was in it." "Neither did I." He stared at me. My father looked at the assessment papers again, as though they might say something different the second time. My mother pressed her fingertips together and looked at her hands. I thanked Mr. Sutton, picked up my bag and left. The calls started that evening. My brother first, then my father, then my brother again. My father's calls were controlled and full of the language of reasonableness. "This isn't about the money, Lena. This is about what's fair. This is about family." My brother's calls were less controlled. By the second day, my mother had started texting, which she rarely did, which meant she was coordinating rather than improvising. On the 4th day, my father came to the house without calling ahead. Marco let him in because I asked him to. We sat in the living room and my father laid out his position clearly, and without apparent anger, which I had learned to be more wary of than the versions with anger. He needed me to understand, he said, that Chester's business was in a difficult moment, that Chester had obligations to subcontractors, to clients, to a bank line of credit that had been co-signed. That my grandfather's portfolio, if retained by me without any consideration for the family, would create a situation that was not just unfair but financially catastrophic for people who had done nothing wrong. He wanted me to liquidate 2 of the properties and distribute the proceeds equally. I told him no. He told me I was being selfish. He told me I had no idea what he had sacrificed for this family over the years. Marco stood up very calmly and said the conversation was over and that my father was welcome to leave. My father looked at Marco the way some men look at things that appear in their path unexpectedly. Then he left. 3 days later, a certified letter arrived from an attorney I did not recognize. Chester had filed a motion in county probate court, seeking to have my grandfather's credentialing arrangement invalidated on the grounds of undue influence. He was claiming that I had spent months manipulating my grandfather in his final weeks to engineer the transfer of assets to myself. I called Mr. Sutton that same afternoon. He already knew. I expected this, he said. Come in tomorrow. Your grandfather left one more thing you need to see. In Mr. Sutton's office, he handed me a second sealed envelope that had been attached to my grandfather's estate documents, with instructions not to open it until I needed it. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to me and attached to it, a 3-page memo prepared by Mr. Decker. The memo was a summary of the financial relationship between Rupert Holdings LLC and one of its tenants. A commercial showroom and office suite in a business park in Louisville, Texas. The suite had been leased for 4 years. The tenant was Chester's company. My grandfather had been my brother's landlord for 4 years. Chester had been sending his monthly payments, when he sent them, to the property management company, which forwarded them to the Rupert Holdings account. The company name on his lease paperwork was Denton Commercial Partners, a DBA my grandfather had registered in 2018. Chester had no idea. He had never connected the 2 names. Chester was 4 months behind on rent. The outstanding balance was $34,812. I sat back in my chair and did not say anything for a long moment. He knew, I finally said. He knew everything, Mr. Sutton said. He had been watching your brother's business for years. He never said a word. As the new controlling member of Rupert Holdings, I now held Chester's lease. I held his $35,000 debt. And I held, as Mr. Decker walked me through over the following 2 days, considerable leverage over what happened to Chester's business next. Because there was one more thing. Chester was 2 weeks away from signing a $2.4 million construction contract with a regional developer named Harwick Properties. It was the largest contract of his career. He had represented himself to Harwick as a financially stable property-owning business. He had in fact listed the Louisville showroom on his asset disclosure as a company-owned property. It was not. It was a leased property he had been 4 months behind on. Marco drove me to Harwick Properties' office on a Wednesday morning. I wore my good blazer. I carried a folder Mr. Sutton had prepared. Mr. Sutton and Mr. Decker came separately and met me in the lobby. Chester was already inside. I could see him through the glass wall of the conference room, leaning back in his chair with the comfortable posture of a man who has not yet realized what is walking toward him. The project manager escorted us in. Chester's expression when he saw me went through several things very quickly. Surprise, confusion, the beginning of something harder. I sat down across the table. I introduced myself as the controlling member of Rupert Holdings LLC, which was the parent company of Denton Commercial Partners, which was the company Chester's business had been leasing its primary office and showroom from for 4 years, and which was the company Chester's business currently owed $34,812 in unpaid rent. I set the lease agreement on the table, the payment ledger, the outstanding balance statement, the asset disclosure Chester had submitted to Harwick with the section where he had listed the Louisville showroom as company-owned, circled in ink. The project manager picked up the disclosure and looked at it. He looked at Chester. Chester said, "This is a misunderstanding." The project manager set the paper down. "You listed a leased property as a company asset. It's complicated. You're 4 months behind on the lease for the property you listed as an asset to qualify for this contract." Chester looked at me. He looked at me the way someone looks at the moment they realize the ground has been gone for a while, and gravity just now sent the invoice. "Lena," he said. His voice came out different than I had ever heard it. "We're family." "You're also a tenant," I said. $34,812 past due. As of this morning, I've instructed the property management company to issue a formal notice of default. You'll have the paperwork by end of day. Harwick terminated the contract discussion before we left the building. Chester's attorney called Mr. Sutton 4 times that afternoon. Each time the response was the same. My position was clear, the documentation was complete, and any further discussion could happen in writing. Chester's business did not survive the next quarter. Without the Harwick contract and facing the back rent collection, the subcontractors he had been stringing along stopped waiting. The bank called the line of credit my father had co-signed. It turned out my father had co-signed it without telling my mother, along with 2 other obligations Chester had taken on in the last 18 months. My parents spent that winter working through what that meant for their retirement. I do not know all the details, I did not ask. What I know is this. A year later, Marco and I are married. We got married in my grandfather's backyard in October, with the marigolds still coming in along the back fence. Mr. Decker sat in the front row. Mr. Sutton sent flowers. We fixed the garage door 2 months ago and now it closes on the first try every time. I still work at the hospital. I still eat lunch standing at the nursing station most days. The income from Rupert Holdings takes care of itself in ways I am still learning to understand. And Mr. Decker and I have a standing meeting on the 2nd Thursday of every month. Last spring, I partnered with a community college in Denton to establish an annual scholarship for nursing students who are working full-time while attending school. It covers tuition, books, and a small living stipend. We named it the Rupert Scholarship. There is a framed photo of my grandfather on the wall of the nursing department office. The one from his garden in his canvas jacket, with dirt on his hands and his old truck visible in the background. He looks exactly like himself. My father called once in January. We talked for about 10 minutes. It was not warm, but it was not a disaster either. My mother sent a card when Marco and I got married. My brother has not contacted me. I do not expect him to. What I have spent the most time thinking about, in the year since that birthday dinner, is not the money. It is the box. My grandfather made those boxes by hand and put careful work into each one. He handed them to each of us with the same deliberate quiet that he put into everything that actually mattered to him. My brother left his on the table. My father left his on a chair. My mother dropped hers in her purse like an afterthought. I opened mine. Not because I knew what was inside. Not because I was smarter or more strategic or more deserving in any way I can measure. I opened it because my grandfather had made it, and because he had handed it to me, and because that seemed like a reason to take it seriously. He spent 30 years building something real and quiet and entirely his own, and then one October evening he tried to pass it forward. He gave everyone in that room the same chance. He watched to see what we would do. My grandfather always said that respect costs nothing and is worth more than people remember. He was right about a lot of things. I still have the note he wrote me, folded in my jacket pocket, in the same jacket I wore to his birthday dinner. I do not take it out often. I do not need to. I know what it says.